If you see this video, it means that the Israelis have broken international law again. It means that they took us as prisoners.
So that's what we're up against, a ferocious counter-revolution, I would say backed by Saudi Arabia regionally. And it's backed both by petrodollars, and it's also backed by unprecedented arms deals with the West.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City, on the internet at thestruggle.org, our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. People often tell me that the struggle is grim. Mea culpa. But today I'm going to start off with some very happy news. Just hours ago, the National Synod of the United Church of Christ voted overwhelmingly to join BDS, boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, joining that movement to put pressure on Israel. The Synod represents churches with 1 million members. These are the Congregationalists. They trace their roots back to the Pilgrims and the Puritans. It's a very important and very happy measure. Now to the latest outrage. Nearly a year after Israel's Operation Protective Edge, Gaza is still in ruins. Of the 7,000 houses totally destroyed, not a single one has been rebuilt. The promises made by Israel to ease the blockade have not been kept. Gaza still cannot import or export by sea. A new effort was made to break the blockade by sending boats to Gaza. This was called Freedom Flotilla III. The boat started with the Marianne from Sweden. This was its path to the Mediterranean. Smaller craft joined it, named after the martyrs Giuliano Mirchamis, Vittorio Arrigoni, and Rachel Corrie. Here's some video from the stop in Portugal. And in Italy.
Stamattina mi sono alzato, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Stamattina mi sono alzato e ho trovato l'invaso.
To have La Marianne here, those people who sacrifice their lives for the freedom of others.
Per liberare Gaza! Per liberare la Palestina! Viva la Palestina! Viva il popolo di Gaza!
Arrivo, il loro arrivo. Benvenuti a Palermo. It's a great honor for our city.
Memoria all'interno della comunità, il legame della propria gente con il territorio.
Because the freedom of others is even our freedom.
By the time people left Greece for Gaza, there were nearly 50 people on board the different vessels. They included brave souls from 17 different countries, among them Monsef Marzouki, the ex-president of Tunisia, Anne Wright, a former U.S. diplomat, Joe Metters, a survivor of the '67 Israeli attack on the USS Liberty, Bassel Khatas, a member of the Israeli parliament, a Palestinian member, and Dror Filer, a former Israeli paratrooper. They were brave. You recall in 2010, Israeli commandos killed 10 aboard the Mavi Marmara and roughed up those who have been trying to get to Gaza ever since. I interviewed Lucas Stamellos the day after the boats left Greece. Here's part of it. And how big are these boats? This is not like the Mavi Marmara, right? These are small.
Mavi Marmara was an exception in the Freedom Flotilla missions. Those boats are small boats, one fishing boat, Marianne, and 3 sailing vessels at about 50-55 feet long. That can carry up to a little more than 10 people each.
And are they carrying any cargo, or is it the principle to get the people there?
The principle of the mission is to highlight the problem of the blockade of 1.8 million people in the Gaza Strip, who live in what is often described as the largest open-air prison on earth. They have no way of getting out, or of exporting their goods, or importing what they need, and this situation cannot be resolved by humanitarian mission, and of course boats cannot carry much that would relieve this situation. The point of the mission is that the international community has to act and has to do something in order to allow a chance for life for these 1.8 million people. Then
just before dawn on the 29th, when the Marianne was some 100 miles away from Gaza, all communication was lost. After a while, the Israeli media reported the boat had been captured. This message was pre-recorded for that eventuality.
If you see this video, it means that the Israelis have broken international law again. It means that they took us as prisoners, acting like pirates. It means that again they have prevented us to reach Gaza, to reach Palestine. It means that we are now sitting there and waiting you to act. We are waiting our governments to act. We are waiting the international bodies to act. But we can promise you one thing: we will be back.
Now, the Israeli press claims that each of the prisoners was given a letter from Prime Minister Netanyahu that said, "Welcome to Israel. It looks like you've taken a wrong turn. Perhaps you meant to sail to a place not far from here, Syria, where Assad's regime is slaughtering its people on a daily basis." I have something to say to the Prime Minister. Are you sure you want to bring up Syria? You want to go into what you're doing in Syria? Cooperating with Al-Qaeda there? Treating their wounded fighters, patching them up, and bringing them back to fight again? The Jerusalem Post said you fixed up nearly 2,000 of them. Not to speak of denying hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Syria their right to return. Your treachery and lunacy won't be forgotten. One day the siege of Gaza will be broken, and the name Netanyahu will be known worldwide as a pitiful sociopath trying to hold back the tide with a bullet. Now recorded at the Left Forum in New York City, Yusuf Khalil talks about those forces who hate both Assad and the Syrian Revolution. He calls these forces simply the Counterrevolution.
Like Yasser said, I wanted to talk about the response by the West and the Arab dictatorships to the uprisings, what we call the counter-revolutions, and to provide that as a framework of what we are up against. and really wanted to stress that this whole thing started after decades of living under repressive regimes, that the Arab masses rose up against those hated dictatorships. Dictatorships that had implemented neoliberal economic policies that have hurt the living conditions of most of the population, conditions which I would argue are the inevitable result of the development of capitalism and of imperialist relations in the Middle East and North Africa. Adam Hani has a great book called The Lineages of Revolt, which I mention every time I speak, because it's really a great really a great text where he brilliantly explains why totalitarianism and the repression of political freedoms in the Arab world aren't just an aberration to an otherwise peacefully developing capitalism, but on the contrary, international capital required the creation of and support for autocratic regimes that would push through those transformations of those economies and the adoption of policies that would have been otherwise be rejected wholesale in any true democracy. So what might have appeared primarily to be movements for political freedom, while those political freedom is a right that's important on its own, but in challenging dictatorships, those movements are actually challenging a cornerstone of capitalism itself and the regional and international power structure that uphold it. So that's a point of view that I'm coming from, and it didn't matter if the ruling class was a Western ally or an opponent to the United States. The Arab uprising swept through North Africa and the Middle East, from Tunis to Egypt to Libya, Bahrain, Yemen, Syria, Iraq. And from the point of view of the United States and its allies among the Gulf monarchies, this revolutionary wave had to be just stopped. And the ruling classes, not just the monarchies, but also what may be termed anti-imperialist dictatorships. The response of those ruling classes was two-pronged. And it was a two-pronged regional counter-revolution. On the one hand, they whipped up sectarianism with the aim of shifting the revolutions from being, masses of people going up against, a tyrant. They want to shift that discussion to be, it's the dictatorships against like those, terrorist extremists, or it's Sunnis against Shiites. And it's important to stress that this whole Sunni-Shia thing that has become very in vogue right now, this isn't some age-old rivalry. Sectarianism is a product of modern conditions that is actively pushed by the bourgeoisie in those countries to consolidate and maintain their power. But then, on the other hand, the second prong of this counter-revolution was direct military repression, as in the case of Saudi Arabia sending troops into Bahrain to crush the uprising there and save the Bahraini ruling family. And more recently, in Yemen, where a massive uprising, overthrew the rule of 33-year rule of Ali Abdullah Saleh, who was eventually had to leave in 2012 after ceding power to his vice president under a Gulf Cooperation Council agreement, basically engineered by Saudi Arabia. An agreement that basically left the state structure intact and the ruling political party intact as well, in what came to be known as the Yemeni solution. Take the head of the pyramid off, but keep everything else intact. And this is important to our discussion in Syria because it's the same solution that the United States and Saudi Arabia were trying to impose and heavily pressure the Syrian opposition into accepting. But there's a lesson to be learned from that, which is that after having ceded power, Saleh is now making an aggressive comeback with the government forces that are still loyal to him, now in alliance with the Houthis, who had spent years fighting, and in alliance with Iranian backing. They have now launched a military takeover of most of Yemen. So Saudi Arabia now sees that as a threat to both its diplomatic efforts and engineering solutions to these crises, but also it sees it as a threat to Iran's expanding influence into the monarchy's backyard. And the Saudi response was a brutal bombing campaign of Yemen, Al-Hazm Storm, which everybody I'm sure is aware of and has been following, but which really signaled a shift in Saudi Arabia's foreign policy, I think, a shift where they are now acting themselves without Washington's explicit approval. And it's a signal of Saudi's increasing role, not just in their direct intervention in Yemen, but also in trying to control and influence the opposition, the official Syrian opposition groupings, and also in shoring up Sisi's military dictatorship in Egypt, where under Sisi's rule, you have more than 3,000 Egyptian citizens killed since the coup in 2013. More than 40,000 Egyptians were arrested during only the first year, and death sentences have been issued against hundreds of people accused of belonging to the Muslim Brotherhood. And remember, this is Egypt, which in 2011 had inspired the world with the January 25th revolution, and now has started carrying out the executions, actually. And I'll take this opportunity to highlight a protest that's coming up on June 20th at Union Square at 1 p.m. To protest the executions and stand in solidarity with Egyptian, but also Syrian revolutionaries under attack from the regime, whether they be secular revolutionaries or whether they be, Muslim Brotherhood supporters that were the Egyptian judiciary has gone nuts, really, in persecuting. So that's what we're up against: a ferocious counter-revolution. I would say backed by Saudi Arabia regionally. And it's backed both by petrodollars, and it's also backed by unprecedented arms deals with the West that have just gone through for Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries in the shadow of the nuclear negotiations with Iran. So there's all of that is happening now. And Saudi Arabia has always been influential in Arab politics. This isn't new, but we are witnessing an increased influence of Gulf capital precisely due to the neoliberal economic policies that have been adopted across the region in the last 10 to 20 years. And that part is new. It's a development that's happening. Anne Alexander, who wrote in the International Socialism Journal an article on ISIS and the Counter-Revolution towards a Marxist analysis, actually had this to say, which I thought was illuminating, both because it also references Adam Haniyeh, who I referenced in the beginning. But she talks about the growing weight of Gulf capital in both a Middle Eastern and a global scale. And she references Adam Haniyeh, who I quote, demonstrates how that conglomerates spanning circuits of productive, commodity, and financial capital accumulation have begun to play a crucial role in the wider region, investing in production and services, using loans, diplomacy, and threats to drive through neoliberal policies bent on opening new markets. So this unevenness, basically between the oil-rich countries and the other countries, has made the Gulf states into more powerful regional actors than they had been in the past. So basically making entire economies and state structures dependent on them, and capable of shaping the outcomes of revolution in Egypt and Syria by backing military-led counter-revolution in one case and working for the hegemony of Islamist armed factions over the military struggle in the other. So that's Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's role also mirrors that of Iran, where Iran is also a regional heavyweight with significant influence and allies in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and now Yemen. And it's Iranian arms, money, commanders, and fighters which have played a critical role in helping Assad to remain in power, although most of his armed forces, regular armed forces, have collapsed in the face of the popular uprising. But Iran is also similarly has played a role in its own hegemony of Islamist armed factions. Among the Palestinian and Lebanese resistance, for example, the resistance to Israel in the 80s. So Hezbollah, which is widely viewed as the most successful resistance movement, having liberated South Lebanon from Israeli occupation in 2000, actually rose over the dead bodies of secular and communist fighters who were killed by Islamist factions in the 80s. That is very well known. But it was effective against Israel and widely respected across the Arab world, nevertheless, but has now shown itself to be just another sectarian militia playing a most counter-revolutionary role in sending its fighters across the border, not to fight against the Israeli occupation, but to kill Syrians and uphold the Assad dictatorship. And I think that's a disaster, because not only have these resistance parties, which include some Palestinian factions as well, and we spoke about that in the previous panel, but not only have these so-called resistance parties formed mutually beneficial relationships with these dictatorships, but they have also virtually compromised the entire national liberation project by tying it to the survival of a single autocratic regime. And in the process, they have counterposed national liberation to a people's uprising for political rights, for democracy, for freedom, and for social justice. So that's some thoughts that I have on this regional counter-revolution and the period that we're going through, and I would love to hear more in the discussion about what other people think. But I just wanted to also turn to the ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq and Sham, and the Western intervention and coalition bombing of Syria and Iraq, so there can be no confusion, as there was from one of the audience members in the previous session, wondering why we could support the role of sending foreign fighters into Syria, which we do not. And let's be very clear about that. The U.S. involvement, we don't support foreign fighters in Syria, no matter who they fight for. We also don't support any kind of Western foreign intervention either. The U.S. involvement against ISIS isn't like in any way humanitarian to save Iraqis or Syrians or Kurds or Palestinians for that matter. Washington is responsible for enough Iraqi and Palestinian blood and has actually blocked Syrians from acquiring more advanced weapons to protect themselves from the regime's attacks. The U.S. only moved against ISIS in Syria when its own interests were threatened in Iraq. And they were very clear about that their mission was to bomb ISIS in Syria to degrade their ability in Iraq. When the whole thing first started last year, they were very clear about what they were doing. And I spoke about ISIS a lot on the previous panel, so I won't repeat it, but I'll just mention briefly that it is my belief, and based on the stuff I've read and based on people I've spoken to, that and based on a lot of analysis, not just my belief, this is a widely shared assumption, that ISIS rose as a result of the American occupation of Iraq and the role of Iraqi and Syrian intelligence officers during that period. And ISIS was able to do what the regime was not able to do, which is crush the revolutionary movements in the liberated areas of Syria. And so groups like ISIS and groups like Jaish al-Islam and Jabhat al-Nusra and the rest of them are not part of the Syrian Revolution, they are part of the Counterrevolution, I would argue. Even if they oppose the regime, they stand diametrically opposed to everything that the Syrian revolutionaries and the regional uprising in general have given their lives for, and that they have stood for, and that they have died for. And in fact, the Assad regime welcomed the US expansion of its war on ISIS, welcomed its expansion into Syria. The government sought to take advantage of this by escalating its own war against the revolutionaries, the territory held by the revolutionaries. And the regime was bombing the same forces that ISIS was targeting. So there was this confluence of interests while sharing airspace with the aircraft of the US-led coalition that was bombing ISIS. And it's important, I think, to point out that the American targets in Syria are not just ISIS, they've targeted other groups. Bombs are indiscriminate, they've destroyed infrastructure, they've killed civilians. And so much so that people are confused. You can't tell, who dropped this bomb in some areas. Was this from a regime plane or was it from a coalition plane? And for opponents of war and injustice in the US, which I believe all of us are, for us, being against the US-led war on ISIS is not enough. We cannot be silent about the crimes of the Assad dictatorship, its crimes towards Syrians and Palestinians and Kurds, and we spoke a lot about that in the previous panel. It's a dictatorship which is responsible for the death of 200,000 Syrians. So with that said, I think that this American intervention is part of this counter-revolution that wants to reimpose an American-Saudi hegemony on the region. And we oppose that, but at the same time, we also oppose ISIS and Assad and the Iranian regime and all despotic regimes. Because resistance is also about freedom and the liberation of people from their economic and social shackles. And it means we should stand in principled solidarity with the oppressed of this earth when they rise up, even if their oppressor falsely claims to be an anti-imperialist. Hopefully we should know better than to side with dictatorships. I would hope that it was something that didn't have to be said, but it's something we always have to repeat, because you'd be surprised about how many people would take that position. Thank you.
Mark your calendars for July 9th, the anniversary of Israel's bloody Operation Protective Edge, and the 10th anniversary of the Palestinian call for BDS. Check our website, thestruggle.org, for a demonstration in Hartford and others around the country. Then, the news of the successful efforts to get Confederate flags taken down, shows that people in the streets can make a difference. On July 25th, there'll be a Millions March in Newark, New Jersey, against police brutality and economic inequality. It's hosted by the New Jersey group People's Organization for Progress. These are TSVN photos from one of their marches in 2012. See our website for more information. Finally, scenes of celebration from the Gay Pride Parade in New York City a few days after the Supreme Court ruled that gay marriage was legal in all 50 states.
hands up again for NYPD Blue, doing such a great job for us year in and year out. Definitely, of course, here, Gay Pride 2015. KQ Radio Live right now. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go, girl. Oh. Come on. Here we go. Yes. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go, girl. Oh. Come on. Here we go. Yes. Here we go, girl. Oh. Come on. Here we go.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. My name is Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.